Welcome to Extraterrestrial Reality. Today we have a very special guest with us, Christopher Noël. He is the author of what I believe is an excellent book, Homegrown Monsters. He just came out with this book, and he provided me a copy of it, and I finished it just recently. And I got to tell you, folks, it's very, very good book, highly entertaining. He has a great theory in this book about that explains his explanation is in this book that explains what's going on with these quote aliens end quote. Actually, if he's correct, I'm going to have to change the name of this podcast to Challenge Your Consciousness Reality and get rid of the extraterrestrial part there. And but it's a great hypothesis, and that's what we're going to talk about today. That basically what we're dealing with here is some sort of consciousness that's able to that operates on a higher frequency and lower density, that basically exists in a higher density, lower frequency than we do, and is jealous of us and wants to advance like we do. Like when we die and our souls move on to another realm, it wants to be like us in that way. Am I saying that correctly? I'm trying to sum it up. There's a lot here to talk about. It's very complex and
yeah, just one thing, you got switched around. By the way, thank you so much, Jim, for having me on the show. I appreciate it very, very much. This is the first interview for my new book, and so the first one to be published. And so I've admired your show for a long time, and I'm very honored to be on. So just to switch something around, you said that the aliens exist at a higher density. I'm saying lower density.
Lower density, yes.
Higher frequency. Higher frequency, lower density. Yes. And when they come into our density level, they can only stay a short while because their default condition is invisible in high frequency, low density. Anyway.
Okay, so when you're reading this book, and there's reasons why these creatures might look like insects or reptilians. I mean, everything is explained in this book on what this consciousness that is here with us. It's been with us since the beginning, apparently. And you have everything. You explain all of these things in the book on how and why they doesn't look. Why they don't look like something else, like really exotic, something that we couldn't even imagine here. So could you explain that?
Yeah, well, most people think that they have to be from another planet. And let's see, there's lots of reasons. I got to organize my thoughts. First of all, yes, it's true that given that what everybody says, that given the almost infinite or perhaps functionally infinite number of galaxies, planets, and suns, there has to be life elsewhere. I think that's undeniable just by statistics. But the likelihood that it would be anything but simple microbes, as was the case in our planet for the first 3 billion years, but for some extremely unlikely sort of arbitrary accidents of fate, we'd still be a planet of microbes. I think the chances that there'd be anything more developed than microbes are much smaller than the chances that there's life as such. And I think that once you get a more complicated development, there's all sorts of, again, effectively infinite number of roads that you can go down in evolution on a planet. And the fact that we have come up with the animal kingdom, the array of creatures that we see around us today, is staggeringly unlikely. That there would be primarily in the book, I'm talking about insects and reptiles as developed in our natural history. And I go through a fair number of examples of how insects and reptiles started out, how their body plans first developed, and certain leaps that took place to get them to the next stage and the next stage. And insects over millions of years developed the ability to shed their exoskeletons, and also all insects go through this metamorphosis stage between pupa and adult, in which the entire structure of the baby of the juvenile dissolves into this sort of soup, as it's called, and then reconstructs itself into the adult form. And just that by itself took so many highly unlikely twists of organic fate. And there's so many tight keyholes that life had to pass through just on the insect side, and then so many on the reptile side, and then so many, and by so many, I mean, we don't even know the half of them, because it took place millions and hundreds of millions of years ago. But we're beginning to zero in on a bunch of examples of information now that we can analyze the genomes of these species. We can extract information about how they developed through time, through vast stretches of time. And then the mammals that led over, again, hundreds of millions of years to primates about 25 million years ago. And then how the primates went in all sorts of different tributaries of development before they came onto the path that eventually led to monkeys. And then the separate path that led to apes. And then how those apes gradually developed over time until just a couple of minutes, well, it's like minutes, a couple million years ago, which is a blink of an eye, we began to emerge as the most competent species in terms of cooperation and brain size ratio to our bodies, and ability to manipulate the environment and predict environmental conditions and adapt to them. So the three primary life forms that I focused on are insects, reptiles, and primates. And insects are by far the most successful creatures on Earth. For every 4 individuals on our planet, 1 is an ant still today. They've been around for 560 million years, insects. Reptiles are about 80 million years later in terms of their beginnings. And of course, our kind of body plan, upright walking, are just like a hair's breadth compared to those two. And what do we see in thousands and thousands of reports of eyewitness reports and contactee and abductee reports of aliens? Well, they look insectile or reptilian, with a dash or two of hominid like us, because they're upright walking usually, and they can use they have hands, which ants and reptiles don't so much. And so this is an amalgam of these two ancient lines of life on Earth, and us much more of a Johnny-come-lately on the stage of this drama of natural history. So what I do based on that thought is try to establish, so that's all chapter 1, and I'm not going to go through any more specifics unless you want to bring them up, because I try to write it interestingly, but it's tedious to start going through this thing. And that's exactly the point. The tedium is a reflection of how many nuances had to fall into place, like tumblers in a lock, at each step of the development of these two major lines of animal life. Just thousands more than we even know about it. And we've been able to catalog and explain and describe dozens of them in each case. But it's so unlikely that insects would come to look as they do today, and not just doubly, but exponentially more unlikely that both insects and reptiles would have developed parallel so that they'd both be like they are today. And then you add on the fact of us developing alongside these other two, and it's vanishingly unlikely that this would even happen on our planet. And then you start to think about a foreign planet, or some people say multiple planets, in which these same species would come about and travel all the way here and mirror so closely our species. I mean, it's just, to me, it's impossible.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, I guess. Well, in this grand scheme of everything, though, there's something else here with us. I guess that's the main driving force of this book.
You start from that premise. So I don't waste any time trying to prove that. I sort of let's take it as a given, and then try to explain what seems to be a logical theory about how it's all working. So you reminded me what I was going to say next, which is that, okay, so you have this intense unlikelihood, but then how is it that they're aliens? Why do they ride around in a craft in the sky and come down and abduct us and freak us out? And well, that's chapter 2. So let's read that chapter out loud, shall we? No. Where I go into trying to demonstrate that consciousness is independent of the physical world, independent of our brains. And one of the main test cases for that is the wildly popular podcast, The Telepathy Tapes, which took the world by storm a few months ago. And those same folks are in the middle of making a documentary now, which should be out either late this year or early next year, in which these nonverbal or limitedly speaking autistic kids are able to use telepathy and remote viewing and blind sight, where they can see without their organic eyes. And it's been 100% successful in, at least in these preliminary trials that were done without strict laboratory conditions, but still persuasively enough to convince me that these kids are an example of what we already also know from many, many other angles, which is that consciousness exists independent of this meat suit that we're in, and information is accessible within consciousness. Any information is accessible, which is a bizarre concept. We can't even wrap our puny this little fractal of consciousness that we're operating with day to day can't wrap its little self around that concept. But evidently, all information is available. There are people who can do book tests where they say, all right, go to your father's bookshelf, and on the third book in on the second shelf, it's orange. Open it to page 140, and you'll see the word lozenge or whatever. And sure enough, so somehow all information in terms of frequencies, like radio frequencies, but there are an infinite number of frequencies in between those that we use for our rudimentary little communication devices. All information somehow apparently is contained and available within that. So there's a particular frequency that is dedicated to that book and that bookshelf. If you do remote viewing, you can, and if you're good at it, you can be asked to, look at a painting in an office in China, and you're not traveling there in your consciousness. Instead, that painting in that office in China is as much here in front of your nose as it is 7,000 miles away in China. You can just attune yourself to it if you're able, if you've exercised that capacity that at some level, I guess we all have, but I haven't been able to access it. Maybe you have.
Yeah, that's what we were talking about here, is this the abilities that we have as human beings that we don't really think about. But I mean, there are things that happen though in our lives. Like for instance, in my life, sometimes I'll think of something and then somebody will call me up, and I'll be thinking of a movie or something, and somebody will call me up and say, "Hey, I just got done watching the same movie I was just thinking about for some reason."
And it's like an old movie, not like
it's not something new. It's something like from 1947 or something.
Right. So consciousness, here it is. It's not only information, it's also the ability to do work, to actually have an effect upon the physical world. So it can both know and act. And so I give examples of the knowing part, and then I move to the acting part, where telekinesis, also known as psychokinesis or PK, can operate on a microscopic level, like in the many decades of experimentation at the Pear Lab at Princeton. It was found that people can cause alterations in random number generators in what zeros and ones they put out. They can make more zeros spat out by the system than would be the 50-50 expectation, to a high statistical significance. So consciousness can act upon matter at the electron level, and it can also act within macro telekinesis or macro PK. It can act on large systems. For instance, I've seen it myself, and so has Leslie Keene. I don't know. Everybody says Kane, but it's spelled Keene, and
Yes, I think it's pronounced Kane. I've been corrected on this myself.
Have you? Well, I guess she says Kane. I don't understand it because of the spelling, but it's just that's the most mysterious thing of this whole podcast. So she has been quoted as saying, and I can read it to you if you're interested, where she goes to this physical medium seance in England that's been going for 40 years and has never been even remotely debunked led by this medium called Stuart Alexander. And she's seen objects levitating in the air, moving about in the air. And she is not afraid of testifying to this, even though she has an elite reputation to maintain. She's a huge voice in the UAP research space, and she also has written this great book I recommend to everybody called Surviving Death, where she branched out in her own exploration, her personal exploration, and began going to the Stuart Alexander, his seances, and things will float up in the air. Stuart himself, people are going to scroll away when they hear this. Stuart himself has levitated. This is real. There's a book called They Flew about saints back in the past and all the irrefutable evidence that they sometimes levitated through the ecstasy of their love of God. It's crazy, but it's published by Yale University Press, no less. So that's by Carlos Eire, E-I-R-E, if you want to look at that. They Flew. It's a great title. And tables, it's very well known that tables can be caused to either tip or fully levitate. And I have a video on my YouTube channel. The channel is Impossible Visits, and the video is called Anti-Gravity Without Technology. So consciousness can do this too. It's like a two-sided power: information access and agency. It can actually perform feats upon matter. So given this, that brings me to think that, okay, these aliens are somehow using or hijacking forms that were naturally spawned by our own zoology, our own history of life on this planet. And how is that possible? Well, consciousness can embody and control matter. It controls you and me. We're all, in my view, going to transcend this husk when we die and move to a higher vibration where we're invisible, but we're no less present and real than we are now. In fact, many people who come back from near-death experiences say it's the most real experience they've ever had. And people who speak from the afterlife, if you believe that sort of thing, which I 100% do, through research and personal experience, they too say, you guys are deluded. You think you're going through you're living in a dream. You're living in a sort of it's analogous to a video game where you're dealing with avatars of your own higher self, which is located, but that's a literal concrete term for what's not literal and concrete, but you're located elsewhere. And you're just sort of playing out a learning process, a growing process here on Earth. Anyway, I think that it's the case that we're animated by consciousness and that these alien beings are animated by a different kind of consciousness, which, and this is going out on a limb, but it makes sense to me, and it's my theory, and it could be proven wrong tomorrow or later today, but they're unable, they exist in a narrower bandwidth than we do. They exist mostly on the far side of the visibility spectrum. Visibility just in the sense of our very limited eyesight. We can push that boundary, that threshold back now increasingly through technology. People are able to see with night vision and thermal and other sorts of advanced camera technology. They can see UAPs with those cameras like the Tedeschi brothers can, that we can't see with our eyeballs. So we're pushing that back. But I think that they exist on the other side of that mostly, and they can dip down into this density level, a higher density, but only for a short time before they need to revert back to their default condition. And I think that that consciousness exists in a bandwidth trap is my idea. Just my idea. Don't shoot the messenger. No, I'm more than the messenger. I made the message up. But they exist in a narrow band such that they can't fully ground themselves in life and be born and have a life and die like we can, nor can they transcend above that into where we're going to go after we die. So I think they're sort of bottled up in this limbo. And this is why they keep boomeranging back and forth between there and visiting us and doing things to us here in this plane. And I just think that, well, there's a lot to that, but I don't want to.
If I was, okay, now let me just, I'm going to try to lay this out and you tell me if I'm wrong or not. Okay. Yeah. So basically we're living in our realm, in our high density, low frequency existence that we are part of right now. We're all part of some sort of a collective consciousness right now, that a connective, and you have the ability to actually interact with this consciousness where like you might realize something and then you'll find out later on and think it's, wow, that's a strange coincidence or something to that effect. So we're all connected in that way. Sometimes, like one time I remember I had a loud ringing in my left ear, and then later on I realized that a dog I had must have been the moment when he got killed, right? Because he got hit by a car, and this was a long time ago, back in 2007. So like we're connected in ways like that, right? However, there's this other consciousness, a challenger consciousness, that's also somehow here with us, but it doesn't have our kinds of bodies. It doesn't have any sort of way to advance. Like you say, we can advance after we die. Our souls, we're basically containers. These are just meat sacks that we're walking around in, and when we die, we're going to go, our souls are going to go to another level, to another frequency, a higher frequency. But this other consciousness, this challenger consciousness, is here. Is it like a singularity, or is it like multiple? I mean, that's the part where I get confused with that.
Well, that's the thing. You've probably all heard of the distinction in terms of kind of styles of analysis. There are lumpers and splitters, and splitters will make distinctions among different categories of phenomena and say there's this, there's this, there's this, and lumpers tend to put them together and try to see them under one umbrella. And in this book, just at least for the sake of argument, I'm putting them all under one umbrella, as this challenger consciousness is just the name, the best name I have so far, a working name for what this other is. And it's different from the spirits that are within our consciousness that can come and go and come back and visit us after death. So I'm proposing that there's this alternate consciousness that's very much like ours in certain ways, like we can telepathically be in touch with it. It too can perform psychokinesis, PK, macro PK, way beyond what we can do. It's more powerful than us in a sense. I think because it's more concentrated in its bandwidth, it can not only cause the gray aliens to float above the ground, but can fling colossal metal vessels through the sky. And like, we're just children with our little table tipping and our random number generator, random event generator manipulations. But because they're part of a more cohesive, powerful hive mind than we are, I think they can combine all this, and there's no limit to what they can accomplish in terms of PK. Another distinction that I like is between difference in degree versus difference in kind. Like if consciousness can affect the electrons moving inside a random event generator, or can cause a table to tip without without using one's muscles, that is already astonishing. Even lifting a paperclip, levitating a paperclip 1 inch off the desktop is already taking the leap of the proof of concept that consciousness can affect matter. Or like Dean Radin did the spoon bending, and he made sure to bend it in the bowl of the spoon rather than at the neck, because it's more believable. It's more skeptics will say, oh yeah, if you do the neck, it's very thin and you can make it heat it up and it'll bend, but the bowl is much, much thicker. And he said it just turned into putty in his fingers, and it bent over and then it solidified again. If we can do that, then that's no different in kind from levitating a UAP. It's different in degree, greatly different in degree. But once you've crossed the hurdle of that proof of concept, the sky's really the limit, because consciousness, we now can accept, can do this sort of thing. So you just broaden, you have a narrow little aperture of what we can do with our consciousness, and then you just broaden the aperture for this other form of consciousness that can work together to.
So basically, I want to make so people listening understand. So on our level, micro psychokinesis, that would be like, if I somehow was able to cause this book to raise up for a second and then drop back down, without me touching it and just thinking of it, and that would be. But from the point of view of the challenger consciousness, you call it macro PK throughout the book. That's how you refer to it.
Yeah, and that's just like child's play to them.
To that, yeah, this is child's play doing this stuff. What they're able to do, what you're saying they're able to do, they're able to basically meld. Well, they are able to tap into the plasma that's here, the plasmoids, the organic matter and metal, and transform it almost instantaneously into whatever they want, like a craft, like a flying saucer, beings that are in the flying saucer, whatever they want to do, because they're trying to interfere with us because they're interested in us. They want to be like us in a way.
They want to be us. This is why the whole what do you call hybridization program? I think that they wish to merge with us because they can't be us. They can't. There's a section in the book called the Trick of Being Born, and this comes from a writer named Nigel Kerner, Kerner. I believe he's German, and he talks about this, and I quote him in the book, where they don't have this natural arc of being born, of living a life, learning, being grounded in this reality. They never can be grounded here. They can only briefly visit and then away again. And then dying naturally. These avatars of the overall other consciousness can't do any of that. They can just visit fleetingly. And so he talks about this being why they're trying to recapitulate birth as we do it through this hybridization. They have there's all these people who have been abducted, and they've come back and said, there are babies in these drawers all over the place. There are babies in these tubes, little fetuses everywhere you look. And sometimes mothers who have had their own fetuses stolen are later taken back and shown their hybrid children. And in one scene that's in the book that's quoted from John Mack, this mother is told by her sort of minder aboard this craft, saying, hug the baby, go hug the baby. Nurse the baby, as though trying to meld with the human natural life and love and sustenance and mother's milk, and trying to get to that sort of bedrock of being part of nature that they're not. This is why they have to hijack nature, both in the genomes of these species that we recognize, and in trying to be part of the time stream, as Whitley Strieber calls it. But their true place is outside the time stream. As Whitley Strieber says, they're not really alive and they're not really dead. They're in this zone, this gray area in between, and they want to vicariously live through us, because we have lives where we can't see the future. They're outside of time, and they can see the past and the future as though it's all happening right now. But we have these spontaneous lives where we're always surprised by what's around the corner, and we keep learning and growing, or forgetting and retro developing if we're unlucky. Go ahead.
What happens if, like, okay, let's go through a scenario here. Like, say, like a regular sighting and a landing and the sighting of alien creatures outside of a craft, and then who get back. And somebody says they say somebody sees this. There's so many reports over the years. A craft lands, creatures get out, walk around, do something, maybe pick up some, dig up some earth and put it in a jar, and then get back into the craft and then go away. What happens to that? What we're seeing in our realm as a solid object with living beings, what happens later on with that? Does it just dissolve back into where it came from? I guess. I mean, how does that work?
I would think that it disintegrates into its components, and then they can use those to form life. I think that's part of what's behind cattle mutilations, because I found out that it's not just cattle; it's all sorts of animals. People find, of course, cattle with all their blood removed, all their reproductive organs, interestingly, significantly, because they focus on our reproductive organs too. And even the brains are missing sometimes. And I found this wonderful lecture by this British researcher, and he's found and has pictures of deer with holes in their head, much too large for bullet holes, big holes in their head, and their brains are removed. Dogs, somebody was driving along, and suddenly was it a badger falls from the sky, lands on the road in front of him, and he goes to look at it, and it too is devoid of blood. It has a hole in its head, and its brain is missing. It seems to me like they're grasping at straws of in the natural world, dipping into the natural world and grabbing these things as though to say, well, the soul must be here someplace. Is it in the brain? Is it in the blood? Is it in the tongue? Because we speak and much more than apparently they can speak. Is it in the tongue? That's why there's a case of a human mutilation of a serviceman, and he had his tongue removed and all his blood removed and his brain removed. But normally you don't see that with people, luckily. Except for the face peelers down in south of the border. But see, I think they are operating under a misconception, if I may be so bold, which is very bold. But we can play around with ideas, right? I think they're operating under some fundamental category mistake where they think the soul is a thing, a commodity that can be taken and used, and they can ride it. Or co-opt it or exploit it into the same sort of experience of transcendence that we're lucky enough to have, this birthright that we have that they don't seem to have, I think. And, Bob Lazar said that to the aliens, we're containers of souls. And I think you can take that a long way in seeing how they go down the wrong path, and they are in this endless loop of trying to gain the soul. When they're poking and prodding and surgically exploring our bodies, they think they're looking for that essential spark, that spark of eternity that's in us. That if they had it, they wouldn't have to bother, seeking it so ravenously as they do. I think so. Just one more little thing is that the soul is not a thing, as we know. It's a capacity, a sort of a bandwidth, to be crass. But I think accurate in my scheme is it's a bandwidth, a capacity to transcend. I think that instead of the soul being inside of us, we're inside the soul, because our soul is much larger than this little brain that you and I are using to talk with our little mouths. We're already on the road to infinity, but we're sort of having we're stopping off here in this schoolhouse.
So I think it's interesting. The government, they for decades now they say that there's no such thing as extraterrestrials. They have no evidence whatsoever. Actually, if you're correct, then they're not lying.
Then they're correct too.
Then that means they're not lying. But I guess the thing is, there has been recoveries, right? And you do go over that in the book too. I just want to talk about that. Like in the case of a recovered craft, I thought it was interesting in the one chapter where you talked about the scientist Gary Nolan, what he said about that they're not getting anywhere. They're not getting anywhere in their reverse engineering endeavors. And I guess the reason would be, if your hypothesis is correct, the reason it is because this thing, it's not meant to. there is no technology as we would understand it, because it's something that was put together by this other challenger consciousness that just for as a device to interfere with into our level.
Well, there's some technology, but not as much as you'd think. Robert Bigelow says there is alien technology, but it's consciousness driven, and I really take that as a sort of as a kind of a root concept here, and I think they make these ships to task for a particular mission. And this is kind of why. It's not exactly why, but you know how people say that they seem like to be one what do you call built as a whole, not assembled in parts. I think they forge these things as wholes, rather like the concept of apports in parapsychology, in seances. Apports, A-P-P-O-R-T, from the French to bring, is when an object suddenly appears out of nowhere or disappears into thin air, apparently. And this is well documented in the history of psychic and spiritual research, that this can happen, and that facilitated by certain very developed mediums, this will happen very frequently. And I've had it happen in front of me in a seance, as I've also seen an object levitating in Western New York 2 summers ago. And I think that what we can do in a sort of a baby way, or a super ultra beginner way with these objects, they can do at a much grander scale. They can I think this is why they go underground and in volcanoes, especially because they're a rich source of metallic elements, mostly iron and magnesium. And that's what, to the small extent that we've analyzed materials from recovered craft, iron and magnesium are way up there in the commonality, but they're often in different isotopes, different number of atoms, of electrons in the atom. I think that's what an isotope is. It's a variation of an element, and these variations are found to be not what we know, but they still come from the raw materials within our Earth. I think that instead of having underground bases under the sea floor or inside volcanoes or underground, I think we see ships going into the ground and into the ocean so much, as you know, as presented so well by Richard Dolan recently in his 3-volume book about USOs. I think they go down there not to live in bases, because again, I think that they can't stay here long, except for what we're going to get to next. I think they are gathering up the raw materials, and then they can de-densify these and go where they usually are at a higher level of vibration, and then work them into whatever object they need, whatever serves their purpose at a given time, whether it's
whatever their whim is, whatever it's thinking that it needs at that moment in time. But I guess
there's no organic objects like these species that we know on our Earth, and then also they use or whether it's inorganic, so you know, metallic ships, or very importantly, cold plasma from high up in our atmosphere. I think this is why, you know, people researching the scientists are forever looking for the propulsion system. But any form of energy that would be used in such a system, whether it's chemical energy, nuclear energy, or electromagnetic energy, would necessarily produce heat. And lots of these craft, as reported by the Tedesco brothers and many others, are cold. They register as cold on thermal. This has come up even on Skinwalker Ranch. They've seen things. There's no heat. In the recent disc that was released by Corbell and Knapp, it has no propulsion system. They haven't said whether that thermal is set to black hot or black white hot. But in any case, lots of these UAPs are cold, which flies in the face of thermodynamics, which would say that you have to that energy is always conserved, and if there's energy of, say, momentum, it has to be it will convert into heat, or or it's not there. Sorry, I lost track of my thought there. But
No, it's interesting.
so none of these propulsion systems, even warp drive, they all need a tremendous amount of energy. Kevin Knuth of University of Albany talks about the Nimitz incident, where this Tic Tac goes from 60,000 feet down to 50 feet in 0.67 or 75 of 1 second. And he said that amount of energy and stopping that amount of velocity on a dime would he says, dump enough heat to power the United States for like a week. It's some outlandish amount of energy that would create. And instead, it's there's no heat signature on this object. So I think that's because they work with the raw materials at the atomic and molecular level at a high enough frequency where they can access this cold plasma that exists in the upper atmosphere. And this is why a lot of the ships are cold on thermal camera, and why, incidentally, I think that's how human spirits are able to come back. They get this energy and they can use it to manifest only for a brief time, say before a loved one, and then they fade away because it takes conscious energy to maintain that. But this is why I think lots of times haunted houses have cold spots, or why when there's a ghost present, there's a cold wind coming through. I think because they harvest the plasma, which is after all just a cloud of highly charged electricity. They harvest it in order to materialize. And this is also why so often supernatural events cause electrical manifestations in our lights and our radios and our cell phones. I think that they use electricity, but the consciousness is not the same as electricity. Anyway, I sure do know how to filibuster, and I apologize.
Oh no, no! We need to learn from you today here. And I'm not. I just read the book one time, and it's going to take me a couple more readings to fully grasp it, because it's a fascinating. The whole concept, the whole idea behind this hypothesis, to me, is just fascinating. Now, with regard to like the creatures themselves, so this consciousness that's here. That's different than us, obviously operating on a higher frequency and a lower density. That is, how are they creating those beings? Is that used from the plasmoids? Is it are they drawing from the organic matter? Like, okay, so you were talking about mutilations before, animal mutilations. Is perhaps some of that material being harvested to create these avatars that they're using to traipse around here and to interfere with us?
That's well put. I think throughout evolutionary history, if they've been here millions of years, they've had all the time they need to create a sort of a, what do you call, like a backlog of organic raw material. And since insects and reptiles have been here for tens of millions of years, you kind of can think of them sort of interweaving themselves with all of this genomic information. And I don't know, I can't answer your question exactly how they do it, because then I'd win the Nobel Prize. But they can manipulate matter. That's all I really know, because consciousness can manipulate matter, and they're conscious and they're more powerful in this regard than we are, or else they wouldn't be able to do what they do. And so I think that when they have what they need. Where? I'm not sure. I don't know if it even makes sense to say that it's a specific location. I think it's at a level of a frequency. Everything, Einstein and Tesla both said, everything is frequency, everything is vibration. So I think that wherever, if you even want to say where, like however they are when they're not manifesting in front of us, their consciousness is powerful enough to mold the raw materials, both organic and inorganic, of our planet into what they need at any given time. So how is it that we have craft that stay here in a solid form if I'm saying that they always have to go back? I think, and I had to kind of punt on this one, I figured there's something that must be called something like density lock, where if it crashes, it can be consciousness. Like if we crash into Earth at 1,000 miles an hour, our consciousness would flee our corpse, right? I think they too are at the mercy or susceptible to death, both in terms of their metal objects and in terms of their organic objects. I think if the Roswell or the Kingman, Arizona pilots or occupants of those craft were killed by the impact, I think they don't just dissolve. I think they dissolve when they're animated. They go back to that state. Lots of abductees in John Mack's books and elsewhere will talk about how they're taken bodily, lifted, floated, levitated, and then they pass right through the window or right through the ceiling. I think that our bodies can be, by this consciousness, wielded by an individual sometimes, but that individual is funneling from a greater source of the entire powerhouse of this challenger consciousness. I think that they make our bodies less dense, or else we wouldn't be able to pass through the window or the ceiling or the roof of the car. I think they can do that. They can change densities. But if there's a certain amount of trauma, I think consciousness will depart from this husk, and then we'll have the craft, we'll have the bodies, and we've captured live ones every now and then. I think that the alien interview that Richard Dolan now agrees is real, and that John Stewart has done great work at investigating the background of and authenticating many of the details. I think that was a real creature, but of course it died shortly after that we saw it on the video. And I think that they're existing in a sort of a undead zombie sort of state when we have them. They're not, if they were fully enjoying the benefits of the consciousness they used to have before being in this denatured, demoted state, they would just go back up and turn back into the non-dense physical form that they have. It's not like they're not physical or that we're not physical when we go up after death. I think that we're just differently physical.
Okay, and I guess my next question would be with regard. You had a chapter in there with regard to the Nazca mummies and the way that they're, to themselves, they're different. Some of them have characteristics of reptilians. Some of them have characteristics of insectoids, and they're all being found apparently in the same area, according to the guy who found them. So, what's that explanation for that?
Well, I mean, it just goes together with the way I think is that it's not only insectoids and reptilian qualities that are evident in these bodies, but also humanoid qualities. They have hands and feet, unlike insects, and fingers and toes. Reptiles have those, but they don't have. But they only have 3 fingers, so there's no opposable thumb. But they have many characteristics that are more human, but they also have reptile and insect characteristics. And I think it's just a hybridization extravaganza that went on Earth in general. I think we luckily happened upon this particular laboratory in southern Peru, where those in charge back in the day, over a long span of time, because some of these are 700 years old and some are 2,000 years old. There was a tradition, a very well-kept, scrupulous tradition of preserving these bodies for posterity, perhaps, or for revering them in the time. But this Tomb Raider happened upon this place, and there's all sorts of controversy about this that we don't probably need to go into. But I'm persuaded that regardless of the origin story or the provenance of the collection of these specimens, the fact that they've been looked at in such detail, in such fine-grained tomography and X-ray, and that leading authorities, including John McDowell from our own country, and it's not just because he's from the English-speaking world, but because he's an award-winning forensic tooth specialist.
Yeah.
Anyway, he's qualified to look at X-rays, especially heads, and say if it's genuine or not. And he has no problem with these specimens. Anyway, I think that they demonstrate the suggestion that there's an amalgam of different zoological sort of pick from column A, column B, and column C on the zoological menu that was available at any given time on our planet. And these, to me, represent that sort of like a meal, if you want to stick with that metaphor, that was made of these ingredients. And I think increasingly we're going to be able to look at the DNA, the genetics of these creatures. One of which was, at least provisionally at this point, was found to be 5% bovine, which makes you think of cattle mutilations, you know. And there's all sorts of. There's a chapter in there where I go through this anonymous Redditor and his description of the anatomy.
I've talked about this guy on my show numerous times, actually. Very interesting. And actually, I am in contact with the person who's anonymous. He's a retired electronics engineer who did a lot of work for the government, and he believes that is actual too. You say you have two sources in the book who confirm that that's real. Basically, what we're talking about here, there was that a person who did an autopsy on an alien body, and he had this gigantic post on Reddit. We talked about it before on the show, and you include it in your book and talk about that.
Yeah, and at times I make some sort of parenthetical asides where what he's sharing about the physiology and the anatomy and the DNA of the gray-like individuals resonates with what we get in the Nazca mummies and what we get. There's all sorts of he draws affinities between the bodies that he knows about and insect life, and talks about the way of excretion, how they excrete waste material. They don't have the same alimentary canal as we do. They don't have anuses. They excrete through their skin. And protein, when it excretes, when we metabolize, it turns into ammonia. And he says that there's a high ammonia content in the blood of these. Well, I say blood. It is. For all intents and purposes, it's blood. It's just different from ours. But the blood of these creatures has a high ammonia content, and they excrete the waste products from this blood. And that chimes exactly with many eyewitness reports about the ammonia smell of these creatures. Like in the Virginia case in Brazil, boy, that ammonia smell stuck around for weeks in the facility that they took the specimens to first, before the U.S. powers that came in and swept him away. The ammonia stayed in the hospital, in the wing of the hospital, for 2 weeks. People couldn't even stand it. The girls who first came upon the traumatized creature in that little lot, that vacant lot.
It was a vacant lot somewhere.
They said that it was just absolutely piercing and pungent with ammonia, and that perfectly coincides with the kind of medical breakdown that this Redditor gives. And there's so much in there that's terrific.
And what explains that? Like in your hypothesis about with this Challenger consciousness, why would they create a creature like this? Like, why would it be? Is there a reasoning? Did you think this one? I mean, I haven't thought this one through after reading.
Well, it's insect based, and it's been available for 565 million years. So if they've been up to what they're up to now, back in the day, this is what they had available, and still available. As remember, I said that 1 out of 4 individuals on the planet is an ant. So if they run low on supplies, and back also in parts of evolution, the insects were much larger. When the oxygen levels in our atmosphere were much higher, the insects grew much larger, so they could use that as a basis for what we see in the grays, which look just like big ants in a way. So if they're using the anatomical kind of substrate of that species, then it's going to automatically have some of the same function. And so the ammonia thing comes out of ants. Ants themselves, our own kind of ants, have high ammonia content in the formic acid of their blood. So naturally, so do the aliens that are fashioned out of ant.
So basically, the Challenger consciousness is just tapping into what we have here, what has evolved.
That's the idea,
and basically recreating it in their own version.
Yeah,
to
exactly.
interfere.
They're mixing and matching, and we see a wonderful spectrum of that in the Nazca mummies, yeah, that to me makes so much more sense than that there would happen to be the same precise, like obstacle course of billions of years of evolution on another planet, or more to the point, on several other planets where people say, oh, there's 19 different species, there's 85 different species from different planets that are visiting us. Why do they all look like, the life forms that we happen to have here? I just don't buy it. Not for sale, not buying it, no sale. It's what Richard Dolan often says, no sale.
So you don't think that there's this to you? I mean, obviously this concept to you was much more believable than something coming from another planet, based on the fact that these creatures, these beings, they take on the appearance of somewhat of creatures that are already here existing with us. I mean, ants.
Well, very close, not even
very
somewhat.
close.
I mean, yeah, they're very close. And you could say, other people say, well, there's the panspermia concept where, the other thing is they have our DNA. They have DNA just like us. I mean, come on. But so some people say, well, DNA as we know it was created somewhere in space, way before, and then it seeded itself on different planets, and we're the result of one of those. Well, I mean, it would have to have done that 4.5 billion years ago, because there's a direct line to the original microbes that existed for 3 billion years of that time, and what developed into us. Like these microbes wouldn't have developed unless at one point this absolutely unlikely and fortunate turn of events occurred where a microbe engulfed a smaller creature, and that symbiotic relationship sustained itself, and this engulfed microbe became what we know as mitochondria. And there's widespread agreement that happened at some point, and only through that would these more cells with greater potential for development have been able to come along and turn into eukaryotic cells with nucleus and the ability to eventually become multicellular. But for that chance accident, we'd still be having a planet of microbes. Anyway, that's kind of doubling back on what I said before.
Well, I want to bring this up. I mean, one of the cases I've been talking about a lot on my show, as you know, is the Las Vegas alien incident.
Yes.
And now that case there, I mean, okay, let's look at it. We have the idea that, first off, the object that came down, it happened to be captured on an infrared camera, and it was cold when it came down. It wasn't a meteor. Could not have been a meteor.
I meant to mention that. That was so wonderful when you brought that forward. I said, yes, exactly what I would expect it to be. That was great. Was really
and then when you look at what we see in the backyard, I mean, there's creatures apparently that are like they're there and then they're not. They're changed. Looks like sometimes they're changing shape. It's hard to really see. They're moving around in ways that we can't move around. And in one instance, when the video was examined by expert Scott Roeder, he came to the determination that there were, in the one area where the creature appears with its head over the fence, that 66% of the pixels were somehow missing there. I mean, how does this case? How could you how could you explain how this case is an example of the this consciousness, this Challenger consciousness at work? Like how does that? What's going on?
Yeah. Most people, including you and Scott Roeder, think in terms of these beings can cloak themselves, and I turn that around and think that since they're naturally insubstantial, invisible, and can make themselves denser for a brief amount of time, I'd say instead of cloaking, they're materializing and then dematerializing. So there's nothing to cloak. Because when they want to go invisible, they don't cover up their solid form; they desolidify. So there's no cloaking involved in my idea. And the shape shifting that goes on in that backyard is congruent with the whole notion that of manipulating and having control over matter. It can do anything it wants with matter, with the raw materials of matter, or even just apparent matter. Like they can use cold plasma to create a sort of a hologram or holograph, I forget which, of a ghost. Not they, but we can make ghosts out of plasma, and they can make anything they want out of plasma. And then it creates all kinds of electrical disturbances because plasma is electrical. And I like the fact that after that night, that family began experiencing indoor phenomena that are consistent with the hitchhiker effect, where once you have a powerful encounter with one of these entities, these non-natural entities, you then are opened up to other similar occurrences or encounters. They had something was floating, wasn't it? And the crucifix on the wall either floated or fell off the wall by itself.
There was stuff like that. There was also there was a bathroom in the back of the house where there was a window, and they actually painted over the window because there was something standing outside of the window at night, and it was a little short creature. So yeah, why would they hang around there? I mean, here's another thing. I guess they all walked in that backyard with guns. What if one of them would have shot one of these things? Would they have had a body there, and what would have occurred?
It depends on how dense it was at that point. I think if it was only, like if 67% of the pixels weren't there in that one video clip, perhaps they were only 1/3 dense, and therefore the bullet wouldn't have any effect. If they were able to fully, people have touched aliens, and they're just like regular arms and hands. During the brief time when they can become fully present, fully dense in our sense of presence. So, I mean, I think this is completely pulled out of my what, but I would think that, you can kill an alien if it's fully embodied at that time, because it has all the organs and the systems that the Redditor has talked about, and that others have been able to observe if they have the good fortune of being in the room with these bodies. So I think it's just a matter. It's a continuum, and if they're fully embodied, they become able to die. But anyway,
now you also.
No, go ahead.
You also talked about like Latchkey Hustle, John Billingsley's channel, Latchkey Hustle, where
I love that channel. I love that channel.
Yeah, and it's a good stuff on there, and he's capturing stuff constantly on there of things flying around like all the time. Basically, I mean, if you were to really, if anyone was to pay attention, you would see these things, but you can't see them with the naked eye. But a lot of times you could capture them on our cell phone cameras.
Just in the last couple of weeks, I've undertaken this experiment with video that has pretty much blown my mind, and I'm kind of a moderate person, so I don't say that lightly. I got a GoPro that can shoot 120 frames per second at 4K, and I've been just outside my front door, inspired by John at Latchkey Hustle, Rob at Undercover ET UK, and Robert Shipe at Custodian File. Those are the three horsemen for me right now. Others are starting to do it, but these are the main three. Inspired by them, I just got this camera. I go outside in my yard and film randomly for less than a minute. I've never filmed more than a minute. I film randomly, and I go back and I watch it at 1/10 speed. It's just like slow, and you see these freaking creatures, these little, they usually look like bugs or birds, but they're traveling many fold faster than bugs and birds, because when you play it at full speed, you can hardly see it on the video, and you're looking directly at it, much less if you're out in the world with 360 degrees of distraction going on. I've never have seen them in real time, but then I play it back not frame by frame, because 120 per second, but very, very slowly, and you suddenly see them. And I've been posting videos on my YouTube channel. The channel is Impossible Visits. And so far I have 2 videos in an ongoing series, I hope, called, Sublanimals, like subliminal animals. There's this subliminal ecosystem going on all around us. And I think it's connected to the same consciousness that UAPs are connected to, because they shapeshift as Latchkey Hustle especially has demonstrated. And I think that they just they're always zipping around us, and we just have no idea. They're up in the sky. They buzz aircraft, and we've known that for 7 years. If we watch Robert Shipe at Custodian File, but they're right in the backyard all the time, unless they're just activated by the camera, and you can't know that because you only see them when there's the camera. And then yesterday and today, 4 times now, all 4 successful, I've gone out and used myself as bait. And I stand there and put my arms up and kind of beseech them to come. And all 4 times they've flown past me, and I've slowed it down and I've showed it. So I have subliminals.
Subliminal.
It's a little hard to say. Subliminals 1 and Subliminals 2, Animals 2 on my YouTube channel, Impossible Visits. So I recommend going to check it out. In the first one, I showcased those 3 horsemen and some of their work, and then I go into what I'm trying to do here in northern Vermont in my own experiment, and it's just been so eye-opening, so revelatory that they're flying around, and you cannot see them. It's just beyond the capacity of the frame rate of your brain and your eyeballs. And this camera, and it'll even do 240 frames per second at 2.9K, 2.7K. So I'm choosing 4K, and that seems to be enough. And just I go out and I run around in the backyard for 45 seconds, and then I look back at it. I try not to look at my old body, but then you see them zipping around, and they're not bugs because they go impossibly fast. You'll see if you want to watch those. Maybe you can link to them in the description.
Yeah, I will. Actually, I want to remind everyone too is that I will have a bunch of links in the description to Christopher's book, to his site, to his YouTube channel. All of that stuff will be included, and so make sure you check that out.
Thank you, Jim.
I want to point that out, so remind everyone.
My website is I'm forgetting my website. It's called the nearnessofyou.net. And it started with my my research in Sasquatch, because they're nearer than we think. But of course, it's now bleeding right over to the nearness of these little subliminal animals and UAPs more broadly. So it still works for that.
So what? Just out of curiosity, what do you think about Sasquatch? Is Sasquatch a creature of the Challenger consciousness, or is that something that's really here,
boy,
with us in our level?
That's my next book. That's my next book down the line. Now that I finished this one, they have a lot of qualities similar. They smell like ammonia. They have their eyes sometimes glow, not reflecting light, but glowing on their own, and so do aliens. They have fingerprints that are very similar to the Nazca mummy's fingerprints. Oh, there's so much. They seem to be able to perform the same kind of psychic feats as the aliens do, and that we can much less proficiently. Like they're really good at telepathy. I have a whole book called Mind Speak with 20 different different of course, 20 testimonials of people in touch with their local Sasquatch group mentally. So we can sometimes do that, but they can apparently do it much more powerfully and reliably than we can. So can aliens. There's a lot of overlap, and I'm still working out my next hypothesis for how they fit in. We keep trying to get a full genetic picture of Sasquatch species. They seem on their mother's side to be human because of the mitochondrial DNA, but we haven't figured out the paternal side yet. So anyway, I could go on and on about that, but that's not the topic for the day. But I filmed a Sasquatch at 7 feet away, but it was in the middle of the night and with a night vision camera, so you can see what you think. It's on my documentary called "How to See a Sasquatch." If you're interested,
I will definitely be looking at that.
Okay.
I mean, I'm fascinated by all of these things. I mean, I think that there's something with this. I don't understand it, but I'm starting to, I'm wondering now, maybe a lot of us might be looking at this the whole wrong way. I mean, I've been looking at this as a nuts and bolts kind of thing, right? And obviously, from what you're saying, this isn't nuts and bolts. This is a different kind of form of life that it's hard to really put your finger on. You really can't. I mean, I guess that's the thing. I don't understand. Like, going back to this Challenger consciousness from the, how long, where did it come from? What do you think how did this happen? What is it? I guess.
Well, then you have to go back way before anything empirical. You just have to try on for size different origin stories of the entire universe. I think, like the philosopher and physicist Thomas Campbell is prominent these days, and he thinks, as do a lot of ancient philosophers, that there was originally a consciousness that began. We don't know how, whether you call it the Big Bang or some other sort of inception of this one consciousness. And then in order to experience, it had to diversify into subdivisions of consciousness while still existing as the source of everything. And so people sometimes call, instead of saying God, where we go after death and we gradually improve ourselves toward this, they call it source. And this is the same idea. So this original consciousness then diversified into all these fractal subunits and different kinds of consciousness. And I just think that there are different kinds of thing. Everything, this glasses case has a certain frequency, a natural frequency. If you strike it, it rings with that frequency, or a little band of frequency. Everything has a different proprietary frequency. And I think that consciousness too has different frequencies and different bandwidths. And I just think if this hypothesis is anywhere near accurate, then it must be the case that in the diversity of things in existence, there's this consciousness that displays itself in this kaleidoscopic array of forms that has a narrower bandwidth, but has its own kinds of powers that we don't have, but it doesn't have that ultimate power of transcendence. And that it just is that way. Like at a certain point, you can't explain any further, it just, and of course, this is not empirical, but it's kind of like empirical facts, like why is the speed of light 286,000 miles per second? It just is that way, why
it
is
just
anything,
is
we just
everything just is.
It's as we find it, is what it is as we find it. And so no one would be able to, you can't ask the aliens, why is your consciousness such as it is, because they apparently tell lots of different stories to lots of different people about their origin, their purpose, their beneficence, they say they're empathetic. They say sometimes they don't care. I think they'll just tell you anything, and I don't think they're evil or good. I think they're just going about their business in this endless recursive effort to try to gain what we have. That's all I think, could.
There's enough evidence at this point that shows that there is something strange going on here that we can't understand. And what we're trying to do, I guess all of us are trying to figure out exactly what is it. And this, right, you have done here is one of those possibilities of what explains everything. That's what I see this as. And I think it's a very exciting hypothesis. I mean, it's something that will definitely keep people, it's going to give people something to think about. I can't recommend this book enough to people because it really had me thinking. I can tell you right now, it was exciting to me, and I actually want to read it again. It was so good. I mean, and actually you actually had another chapter too, an epilogue that you added that you sent me. And,
yeah, I'll talk about that in a second. I really want to appreciate your saying that, Jim. I really, really appreciate that. For a while, it was only in paperback, and it was expensive because it's full of color images, and it's expensive to print those. But just now, I have a Kindle version out for $2.99. So if you're interested, I recommend the Kindle version. Because the images are vivider in Kindle, in addition to it being digital and inexpensive. So that with the Boogosphere, in addition to the Nazca mummies being a great object lesson of this ability to amalgamate from the raw materials of zoology, the Boogosphere is a great example of this whole density idea that I have, that this Challenger consciousness can manipulate density of matter, and that's how it comes and goes and does what it does, instead of there being some other dimension. We haven't even talked about dimensions yet. I think if the underlying situation is being density related rather than separate realities. I don't think there is separate reality. I think it's all one place. It's all here. and that there's just different levels of vibration. And that's what John Keel thought also. But the Boogosphere has suddenly emerged out of nowhere to seem to present a very good example of density change, because when it was first recovered, comes an airplane that I should be filming so I can see the little.
I was waiting for you to go diving under the table. Or
I know. No, I should grab my camera and dive outside and get that, because there'll be a little UFO more than likely.
Tailing it, probably.
Tailing it, buzzing it, playing with it. Anyhow, so this Boogosphere, when it was first recovered in Colombia, city of Buga, it was easy to just lift to carry under this man's one arm. He said it was about 2 kilograms, which is 2.4 pounds. Over the succeeding weeks, it went up to 6 kilograms, and then eventually 10.1 kilograms, which is 24, 25 pounds. So that's a huge weight gain. And I think that it's clear to me that, so if it was 2 pounds in the beginning when it fell to Earth, 2 kilograms when it fell to Earth, when it was floating around a few minutes earlier, and it was being filmed by 2 separate people at different sides of the city, it was being filmed, and those films have been authenticated, these videos of this thing floating around. It was then it was lighter than 0 kilograms, because I think its density was such that it was lighter than air. It was buoyant. I think that's how the macro PK is accomplished, through density change. And levitation is just when something is less dense, even though it may look the same, it's less dense inherently, and it therefore lighter than air. And so this weight gain or density gain that the Boogosphere went through in the first few weeks of its being in our possession, the possession of human beings, shows that this object can alter its density, which was a cornerstone of my theory. So my theory, or my argument, had this missing puzzle piece, because everything was circumstantial evidence, and sort of trying to logic it out in my own mind and trying to articulate it on the page. And then this seems to fit that puzzle piece, at least in that respect. There's also other things about it that are fascinating, but we don't have to go all into it. But I think it's legitimate, even though it's connected to Jaime Maussan, which for some people casts a suspicious shadow onto the whole situation. But, he's done great work with the Nazca mummies. If it weren't for him, we wouldn't have made nearly the progress. He, at the very least, has the influence and the funding to pump into these cases and get professional analysis accomplished that otherwise wouldn't be able to be. He's paid for the Boogosphere to be analyzed in many different at many different levels by this leading university in Mexico that wouldn't otherwise have touched it without Jaime Maussan's wherewithal. So I think that whatever he did in the past, that doesn't mean that these two examples, the mummies and the Boogosphere, aren't 100% authentic. And I think from everything I've seen that they are.
Here's my opinion on Jaime Maussan. Like when the Nazca mummies first came up a few years ago, I was like, oh, here we go, because I was skeptical of him too as well, because there was a couple of things in the past that I didn't appreciate, like that Roswell mummy and all that kind of thing. However, I've come to the conclusion that Jaime Maussan he's a showman. And I think if he sees something that he thinks has the possibility of being real, he's going to latch onto it. And I think what's happened the last couple of, at least with the Nazca mummies, and I think as we're learning with the Boogosphere, he'll latch onto things that he thinks have a possibility of turning out to be real, weird, actual alien objects or creatures or corpses or whatever.
Right.
And I think he latched on to some winners this time. Of course, sometimes in the past there were things that he probably should have backed away from quicker than he did. But I think he's just a showman. He's a showman.
He's hungry for success. Like
yes,
we all are. He's got an ego. He's got a larger ego than most. And when he sees something come along that seems intriguing and seems a vehicle for this ego, he'll glom onto it. But say that's the case, and then say something real comes along, wouldn't you expect him to glom onto that? You would. And so these last two things, at least so far, and the Nazca mummies came to light originally in 2016, in December 2016, and that's a long time ago now that they've been studied. And nobody except these charlatans at the Ministry of Culture in Peru have been able to debunk it. And the charlatans just used these dolls that were produced, and
Right.
as if
Yeah,
that's
it's very upsetting in a way. It's like
very transparent and childish, though. It's not very effective.
No. I mean, but here's the problem though with that. Like, well, I know we're getting a little off track, but I just want to point out the problem I have is the fact that you do have these other sides saying, "Oh, this is all fake," and so the person who just has a casual interest sees, "Oh, it must be fake because this scientist says so," and that's the problem when you have this kind of stuff. And I don't like that. That bothers me. You know, you would think that at the same time, like you were talking earlier about John McDowell. I mean, this guy's a noted expert in these kinds of things. Obviously, he's saying otherwise, that there's something mysterious there's something unknown about this. This is something he's never seen before.
It's the exact same with the situation with Sasquatch and with the afterlife. If you don't look into it, if you're not inclined to dig into it, then you're going to sort of be like a reed in the wind, and whoever has the loudest voice is going to persuade you, at least temporarily, you know, until you develop a curiosity about it, if you ever do. But if you are interested in digging in, all it takes is a few days of research in Sasquatch, and you know it's real, and perhaps a few months into the afterlife, and you know that it's real. I have a book called There Is No Veil, in which I lay out my best case from various angles for the afterlife, and you see what you think. And like, if you just don't read my book, but read Leslie Kane's book, Surviving Death, that is just the best. That's the best book I've ever read on this topic. But there are also many going back 150 years by Nobel Prize winners, by all sorts of high reputable intellects, and you know, impeccable characters throughout the history of psychic and spiritual research that are just irrefutable. Anyway, so that's off the topic also. So do we want to wrap it up, or we have?
Yeah, let's. I just want a couple of things here I just want to point out. So I guess the bottom line here, based on what we've been talking about here today with your new book, Homegrown Monsters, is that they're extraterrestrials or NHI or aliens or whatever you want to call them. However, they're not really coming from other planets. They're here the whole time, actually generated by some other conscious that operates on a lower density and a higher frequency than where we are, and they're the ones responsible for creating these things. They use the plasma, they use the metals that are here, they use the designs of they use the insects and other animals, other creatures that are already here with us. That's what they base their creations on, and they use that to intermingle with us in a way, in some sort of effort that you don't think is going to be successful, in an effort to somehow create versions of themselves in our density.
They're trying to enter nature. They've always been trying to enter nature, but they've been hijacking nature instead, because they're not part of it. I don't know why, but it seems evidently that they're not, or else they wouldn't be trying millennium after millennium to do this. Like back in the ancient world, lots of cultures practiced child sacrifice, and that's because their local deities told them to sacrifice these children. And why is that? I think because it's been said that children are still half in heaven. They were just at the higher frequency. They haven't been fully kind of encrusted by life in the dense earth level. They're still half in heaven, which is why little kids seem to have spirit just like shining out of their eyes like beacons, and less waterlogged by age than the adults that get to be. And so I think that the various representatives of this Challenger consciousness back 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 years ago wanted their subjects, which they ruled over, which is us, to sacrifice children so that the soul could be released and they could eat it or ingest it. I think they're sort of like vampires for vibration in a way. So that they thought they could have a shortcut to that by having these children by experiencing and trying to harvest the vital essence of these children as they died. That's another just wild hypothesis I have. But I think that back in the day they helped us survive through teaching us agricultural methods and animal husbandry methods, and sort of referring to that is current crop circles and messing with our cattle. But I think that they helped with crops so that we could survive for the same reason that they're trying to prevent nuclear war, and that they're instilling in people visions of environmental disasters and what's the word for Armageddon? Apocalyptic scenes, because they're trying to save us because they need us. It's like a parasite host relationship. They can't afford to lose us. So that's why they want to help us. And they're not going to exterminate us, because that would be counterproductive to their whole mission all these years. They're like Sisyphus pushing the boulder up the mountain, and it always rolls back down, but they're trying to resonate with our vibration. And I think whenever they come close to a person, they get a buzz out of it, even as they are buzzing us. I think they get a buzz out of being close to us. I think perhaps that's why when I go in the backyard and turn on my camera, they're around. I think they're around you and everybody watching. And if you want, it's only $240 or so to get one of these cameras that takes super slow motion, and then you too can see these same things. And again, that's Sublanimals on my Impossible Visits YouTube channel. That mark my word, that's a silly sounding name right now, but it's going to become a household word one of these years. I'll tell you. I tell you.
I'm going to tell you this. I want to say this. I really enjoyed the book, and I really enjoyed you coming on the show and talking about it. And I highly recommend this book to everyone. It's Homegrown Monsters. There will be a bunch of links in the description for this episode. And I really enjoyed this. This hypothesis that's laid out in this book. It provides it actually answers a lot of the reasons why these things are so enigmatic. I mean, in my mind, that it provides a decent reasoning as far as something
a possible underpinning for some of this. Yeah.
Yes, it really does. And that's why I thought it was extremely entertaining, because it made me think. It has me thinking about, okay, maybe this is what the explanation is behind all of this stuff. Maybe it's not nuts and bolts like a lot of us think. I mean, in a way, sometimes it might be for a few seconds, but in the next few seconds after that,
right,
it's all gone. And I think that's
the ones that our species makes are nuts and bolts, and we're trying to emulate their constructions just like they're trying to emulate our natural life. But then that's a whole nother issue, to the extent to which we've been able to reverse engineer, and how we've needed to sometimes make use of psionics and even psychic children. I have some material in there about how the powers that be are sometimes harvesting psychic children and adults to force them into being a liaison between humanity and the other consciousness, in order to help us use their craft, their technology. So that's a whole nother 2 hour. That would be a long conversation with somebody with more knowledge than I have.
Well, I'll just say this much: if your hypothesis is correct, I have no idea where the government would even begin to try to explain this to everybody. Because it would be how would they? I mean, for them, they probably if they think that this is what it is. How do you explain that? I mean, it's very difficult to try for a lot of people. It would go over their heads. I mean, it would have. That's what you do in the book, which I think is useful, because this is how this would work. This is what this means, and that's why.
It may be that they don't, what I think, so many of the explanations and the whole like paradigms within which the thinking takes place at the governmental level and even at the research level is mired in the materialistic paradigm. It just seems to me that in a way the entire history of humanity has been a sort of a global seance, where things are happening that also in microcosm happen in seances, and that seances have a sort of like an old-fashioned kind of a fringe woo-woo kind of ring, but I think that they show what can be done with consciousness and matter. And I think that you can extrapolate from what happens in seances, which I go into in There Is No Veil, to the macro level of what's happening with this consciousness and the matter that we know of as our familiar world. But anyway, I really, really appreciate, this is the first interview for this book that's going to be published. I did another one that's coming out later, but you're the first. So I really, really appreciate it.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show today, Christopher. This was very interesting.
Anytime.
It's very enlightening. Yes, and we'll have to do this again sometime, I'm sure, in the future. Have a discussion about this. Take it to another. Maybe when the Bigfoot thing comes out, we'll have a discussion. I'm actually having a new podcast that's going to be premiering sometime this week. A separate podcast for this one with Scott Roeder, called Absolute Proof, and we're going to be talking about a lot of different things on there. So maybe at some point in the future we could talk, have you come on that show as a guest. That would be good.
I'd love it. I'd love it. Actually, I sent Scott Roeder my little clip of the Sasquatch climbing up the apple tree that I alluded to earlier, and I said, "Can you work with this?" And I never heard back. So maybe he doesn't think so highly of it. That's okay.
Whatever. I don't know. I didn't mention it to me. I know he has a lot on his. I know he's been.
I figured he has so many people. But anyway, I want to say I've been a fan of your channel, and that's why it's an honor to be on. I really admire your work ethic too. You put out several a week, and a lot of thought and preparation goes into each one. So I really am I applaud your work.
Thanks a lot.
We got a mutual admiration society going on here.
Yep.
Oh well, that's okay. It's better than the political situation.
Oh yeah, we don't want to get into that.
No.
Well, I want to say this. I want to say thank you all for joining us here today. Until next time.